Hi there. When I first started teaching, I started to recognize that there always seemed to be some sort of label du jour. So when I remember the era where ADHD was the catchphrase and everybody had ADHD and they were being diagnosed and on medication and all this other stuff when I was going through school. And that continued into teaching. I'm noticing the same thing in psychology. Right now, borderline personality seems to be one, but one that seems to be constant and overused, besides depression and anxiety, is PTSD or trauma. And so the video today is to help distinguish between trauma and PTSD, and between trauma and just what's a bad day. Because part of our job is to make sure that we aren't over pathologizing, which means we aren't just giving people a label so that they have a label. We don't want to label you with anything if you're not actually sick and it's just normal stuff. So, long-winded introduction, but hi, I'm Kim Long and I'm with Docha Psychological Services in Spruce Grove, Alberta. And as always, this video is just meant for educational purposes. It represents my opinion based on my experience and the readings I do. It doesn't necessarily represent the views of the entire field or my college. It also doesn't constitute a therapeutic relationship. So by all means, consult with your therapist because they know you better than I do. And also consult with yourself because you know yourself better than any of us. With that said, let's get started. Okay, so let's start with trauma versus a bad day. So a bad day can feel really upsetting, right? But it's not going to have lasting consequences. And what I mean by that is once the bad day is over, you start fresh on the new day. And that's not to say that you aren't ending up with layers of crap in your system that you'll eventually have to deal with. But the events of the day itself weren't traumatizing because they didn't create some sort of lasting issue that you're then dealing with for weeks or months to come. So that's a bad day. Something that's traumatizing will have a lasting impact in some way. It will either change your beliefs about the world, or it will make you way more hesitant to trust people. It might make you more jumpy for a little bit. And it kind of gets stored in your system, meaning either your thoughts or your body or your emotion, as something that can then be set off later. You may have nightmares, things like that. So that is something that was traumatizing, but it won't necessarily turn into PTSD or a trauma and stressor related disorder. It depends on what resources you have, how you're able to overcome adversity, what other stressors you have going on in your life. Those are all things that can impact whether or not a traumatizing event turns into something where maybe you're going to need some additional help to work through. So, in summary about that section, a bad day you kind of can get over and it's not going to impact your life long term. Trauma might impact your life long term, and you're going to notice different symptoms that start to show up until you work through whatever it was that traumatized you. Now, how does that impact PTSD? PTSD and other conditions that warrant a diagnosis, they have to meet certain criteria in our diagnostic Bible, the DSM. And so I'm only going to talk about PTSD today. There are other trauma and stressor related disorders, but PTSD seems to be one that people throw around a lot and it gets confusing. So PTSD has to meet something called criterion A. And criterion A is where you have been exposed to, in some way or another, a life-threatening incident or of significant physical harm. So it's related to something that's physical, or where you felt that physical threat in some way. Now, it could be something that you experienced directly, or it could be something that happened to someone who is incredibly important to you, like a family member or a really close friend. It could also be something that is within society at that moment. Like if you're exposed to war or things like that, but you haven't necessarily seen it directly, but it's in your immediate community. All of that could meet the criteria A. Now, if you don't meet that criteria, we go no further in that diagnosis for PTSD. So you could still experience a traumatic event, but if it's not life-threatening or threatening significant physical harm, it doesn't meet the criterion for PTSD. But it could meet the criteria for other trauma and stressor-related disorders in the DSM. So that's a whole other thing that you have to talk about with your therapist, because today we're just talking about PTSD. So once you meet criterion A, there's a bunch of other stuff that you have to meet too in terms of severity, how many symptoms you have. So there's also, the symptoms have to last more than 1 month. If they don't last more than 1 month, it'll either meet, like I said, a different diagnosis, or it's something else. So the other criteria that you're looking at with PTSD are intrusions. These are things like flashbacks, nightmares, body responses to triggers. Triggers are internal, like just a feeling you get, or external cues, like seeing a certain color green on a tree. That could remind you of where you were when the traumatic event happened. Those are triggers. So again, intrusions, flashbacks, nightmares, body responses to those triggers. There's also avoidance behaviors, like you're avoiding any opportunity to be exposed to those triggers. Negative thoughts or mood changes, like the world isn't safe, no one can be trusted, I am bad. You feel anger, guilt, shame, fear. You can't feel positive emotions, and you're disengaging from the world. There's also changes in reactivity, meaning that you are more likely to respond angrily faster, and you'll have angry outbursts. This is also where hypervigilance comes in. Hypervigilance means you're looking over your shoulder and you're just waiting for that shoe to drop, and you're just really always tense. You'll have sleep issues. You may be more easy to startle, so you become more jumpy. You're going to have issues with concentration. And then the last really important thing in considering this diagnosis is it has to be causing problems in your work or social or some sort of relationship where it's definitely affecting your ability to function in life. Okay, so that's a lot of information. So just in summary, the categories are intrusions, avoidance behaviors, negative thoughts or mood, changes in reactivity. And then it has to have those impacts in your life that are long-lasting, more than a month, and severe enough that it's disruptive, like your life just isn't working very well and people are noticing. Whew, that's a lot of information. So as a psychologist, it's important to me that I'm not overdiagnosing people, which is why I'm talking about this video today. Something can feel really, really horrible and have impacts on your life that are lasting for longer than you would like. That doesn't necessarily make it PTSD. It is something to look at, and it's something to support you through. It's really important. And I'm just also really cautious about labels, because sometimes people own their label and they think they are the PTSD, but no, the PTSD is just the illness. You are still you, and we can get back to you for the most part. Okay, so as always, if you have any questions about any of that, feel free to contact us. And if you notice that you're struggling and some bad things happen to you, I invite you to reach out to people. just because it's not necessarily a clinical diagnosis, it doesn't mean that you can't prevent it turning into a clinical diagnosis. You can go talk to people and get support and recognize your own strengths. Trauma happens when we get overwhelmed and our typical ways of coping don't work. So this illness isn't your fault. It's caused by things that happened to you that made you feel out of control and not safe. So there's nothing wrong with you, right? There's something wrong that happened to you. I'm not explaining that very well. Maybe that's a whole other video of the difference between, anyway, I'm getting off track and this video is already quite long. So again, if you need anything, remember how wonderful you are, and connect yourself with some resources. And until next time, I'm going to stop talking. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now.